Start this.
Everybody has cookies, coffee.
And I'll give you a quick
Okay.
We're all very lucky to have Professor Emilee Rader speaking to us today. Emilee, as you know, is an assistant professor in media and information, one of the co-leaders, co-directors of the BIT Lab, currently managing like 9 or 10 NSF projects. which is a lot, okay? It's like 9 or 10.
It's surprisingly hard to spend money. You wouldn't think so, but it is.
Yeah. And so Emilee's been doing some fascinating work on how Facebook's filtering algorithms changes large socio-technical systems over time. It's really very interesting and novel research. Without further ado, thank you.
Thank you. So I just got done teaching, and I feel like my voice is not as loud as it normally is. So if you're having trouble hearing me, just sort of wave or something. No, CK's like, no, you're totally fine. Okay. All right, so the title of my talk is How the Facebook Newsfeed Algorithm Affects User Beliefs and Behavior. We're all overwhelmed by information, and we rely on technology to help us identify what things we should be paying attention to. This technology personalizes the way we experience information online, and it looks like spam email filters, personalized search results, product recommendations, and behavioral advertising, right? We all want to go somewhere warm in the winter. Obviously, I've been daydreaming about tropical vacations.
We need to organize the next meeting of in a tropical place.
Tropical
Right?
place, yeah.
Everybody would approve it. Yeah. Students included.
So Facebook uses an algorithm. Basically, an algorithm is a process or a set of rules for completing a task or solving a problem to rank the posts that you see when you visit your newsfeed. I'm sure everyone has experienced the newsfeed, so I'm going to assume that you all know what Facebook is. So I call this algorithmic curation, the automatic selection and ranking of content to present to people. The algorithm directs our attention to posts that the ranking system thinks we will find most interesting. Basically, by putting those more interesting posts closer to the top of the newsfeed. And the less interesting posts, it publishes further down in the newsfeed. So in choosing how to rank posts, the algorithm takes into account a lot of different kinds of information. It tracks information about people and about content, and it's changing all the time. They're constantly changing the algorithm. So these are screen captures. Facebook actually has a blog where it publishes information about changes that they've made, and these are sort of changes over time. But they track things like how often you interact with someone, how frequently content from a page is marked as low quality. So if a page creates a post and a lot of people don't like it, then that thing won't get shown to people. Which posts are getting the most likes or comments or shares or even clicks. Facebook identifies and prioritizes posts that are about trending topics. You may have noticed this. It even tracks how much time you spend looking at different kinds of posts. It tracks direct input from users, like when you specifically hide a post that reflects both metadata about that content and also about the person that posted the content. And they've even started soliciting direct feedback from users. You may have seen this in your newsfeed. A little survey about did you really want to see this post, comparing two posts and saying which one would you rather see. So soliciting feedback from users, basically, about how much they want to see certain stories. So there's a feedback loop in systems like the Facebook newsfeed. A feedback loop happens when the output of a process becomes the input to that same process. So this is my little diagram of what a feedback loop looks like, and I'm going to walk through each of the steps. So you go to Facebook, the page loads, and posts appear on your page. Then you might read the posts. You scroll, you skim, you skip over some posts, you spend more time looking at other posts. Then you might interact with some of the posts. So you click on links, you might hide some posts, you might comment on things or unfollow somebody. Then you might create content yourself. So you create a post, and you might specify a particular set of people or an audience or a privacy setting for that post. The system then stores and processes that content and related metadata about that content. So how many likes the post got in the first 30 seconds or something like that, for example. And then makes inferences about you and about the future, basically potential for that post to be exposed to other people in their news feeds. Then it outputs a ranked list when the next person visits the Facebook newsfeed. So when either you go to it again or when somebody else goes to their newsfeed. So the input is this corpus of content and all the associated metadata. And then the output is a new ranked list of posts. So this feedback loop on Facebook is different than other kinds of personalization or recommendation systems. So for example, on a system like Netflix, which uses very similar kinds of algorithms to make recommendations to users, the people who are watching the movies on Netflix are not necessarily all creators of movies themselves. This is a really important distinction. So on Facebook, the consumers of content are also producers of content. So what users learn about the system as they're consuming content can actually potentially affect the choices they make as producers of content. So this means that the corpus of content in Facebook is constantly evolving and that the algorithm plays a role in that evolution of the content. So in this case, the posts that users create and the activity data that they generate as they're interacting with posts in the system is input to the algorithm, but it's also output in the form of the posts that are ranked and displayed by the algorithm. People often assume that algorithms are neutral and that they're totally free from bias because it's a machine, right? It's just math, it's just instruction, it's neutral. But that's not really the case. Algorithms produce biased output all the time. And a couple of examples of the types of bias that can happen are on the slide there, the popularity bias. So popular posts, you may have noticed this, popular posts get ranked higher, they get more attention, which means more people interact with them, and that makes them even more popular. It's called the rich get richer effect sometimes also. But the opposite of the popularity bias is the threat of invisibility. So that happens, and you may have had this experience too, when you post something like, maybe really late at night or maybe really early in the morning, and you think a lot of people are going to see it, and it just doesn't get any likes at all. And you're like, crap, why did that happen? Well, it's because it didn't get a lot of attention. And so if it doesn't get ranked high for other people, then they're not going to get a chance to interact with it, and so it might become invisible. So the feedback loop on Facebook is a socio-technical system that involves information processing and decisions and actions that are made both by the user and by the system. And this interdependence between the system and the user means that there's unexpected behavior that can emerge just purely as a result of this feedback loop as it's going on. And the feedback loop makes what users are and are not aware of when they're using the system pretty important when you think about both the beneficial aspects of automation, so it can help us with information overload, and also the potential negative consequences of bias in the system. So filtering algorithms can limit the content that people consume, basically because they're making choices on the user's behalf about what they're going to be able to pay attention to. So in effect, people are delegating choices, they're delegating effort to the system. They're delegating the work involved in finding interesting content to the system. And because of this potential for bias, we really need a better understanding of how users interact with algorithms and what they can learn from interacting with them. So, in my talk, I'm going to talk about some research I've been working on for the past couple of years, focused mostly on the interaction between users and the newsfeed algorithm on Facebook. So I'm going to talk about some qualitative analysis that looked at people's responses to a question about how they think the newsfeed works. I'm going to talk about some reactions they had to experiencing a situation where their expectations for what would happen might not be met. And then I'm going to sort of wrap up by talking about the relationship between their causal beliefs and expectations. All right. So why Facebook? Facebook is actually pretty interesting in the context of algorithmic curation because if you think about doing a Google search, you don't know all the content that's out there in the world. So you don't know if you're seeing all the things that you should be seeing when you do a Google search. But on Facebook, users actually have the potential to have kind of a feeling or an idea about who they should be seeing posts from at any given time, right? You have a friends list. So you kind of have a sense of who's out there posting things that you should be able to see. which means they might be able to notice when they're not seeing things that they feel like they should be seeing. So this means we can actually ask people to reflect about aspects of how the algorithm might be affecting their experiences. It's really hard to ask people this about Google because there's no way for users to know if they're seeing what they should be seeing. So even if people don't know what content is actually in the system, because they have a friend list, they can develop this feeling for what they should be seeing and what they shouldn't be seeing. So basically, it's possible for them to notice when there's things that they wanted to see but didn't. And the way they can do this is by visiting the timelines of their friends if they feel like they're missing something. So we wondered whether people might be noticing these symptoms of the algorithm in their newsfeed as they were interacting with it. So maybe there's indicators they're picking up on that they're using to form expectations about what's going on in the newsfeed. So we did 2 surveys. Part of this work was done with Rebecca Gray while she was still here as a PhD student. And one survey we conducted with Qualtrics, the other survey we conducted on Amazon Mechanical Turk. And I'm just going to go over just a little bit of details about what these samples look like. So 410 Qualtrics participants, 464 MTurk. Everybody was located in the US, everybody had to be 18. We restricted it to people who said they had 20 Facebook friends or more. 20 friends is kind of low if you're thinking about algorithmic curation, but we wanted to make sure they had a minimum number. Everybody visited Facebook at least 1 time per week, but really they all visited multiple times per week. Qualtrics, if you've ever used it, you can specify quotas for the characteristics of the sample that you want. And so we use an age quota. 30% of the people had to be older than 50. MTurk, you can't really do any age quota, but we did, for data quality purposes, restrict it to people who had high approval ratings. So just a little comparison of the demographics. I know this is a really busy slide, but I didn't bring up a pointer. So you can sort of see that the Qualtrics sample is more women than men. That's typical for a Qualtrics sample unless you use an age quota. The MTurk sample was more men than women, which is also typical for MTurk, especially if you're asking about sort of techie kind of topics. Most people visited Facebook several times a day. Most people posted less than once per week, so they weren't really active posters. Most people had 20 to 300 friends, so not huge friends list, but the average I think is around, I don't know, is it 250 still? I don't know what it is. On the site, yeah, I think it's about 250. Age, MTurk was a little bit younger than Qualtrics. Obviously with the age quota that makes sense. Most people were high school graduates or had some college, and most of the participants were white.
Wow. It's there.
So this very full slide is basically an outline of what the survey looked like. And the survey was very similar for both samples. So the first thing we did was we created a Facebook app that integrated with Qualtrics. And what this did was when they first visited the survey, they were asked to log into Facebook. And then they saw this, which this is not an actual screen capture, but we use the same JavaScript library that created this window. This is a friend selector. Basically, it shows the user's Facebook friends. And by integrating the survey with the Facebook API, we were able to actually pull from the person's actual friends list when we did this. We just used, at that time, 2 years ago, what was the basic level of permission, which allowed us access to the person's friends list, the profile pictures for their friends, and it also allowed us to basically generate a link to the friends' profiles. We didn't ask for any permissions higher than that, so we couldn't see anything about the friend's behavior or the friend's posts, or even the user's posts themselves. And the reason for this is we didn't want to basically bias the sample to only people who didn't really care about the privacy of their friends. We wanted to be sensitive to people's privacy. So they had to select 4 people that they identified as close friends. And then the survey popped up the friend selector again, but had pre-selected a number of basically randomly selected friends. And the reason why we popped up the friend selector again was because we wanted to give people the opportunity to deselect people that they didn't want to answer questions about. So like you wouldn't want to have like all of your exes in that list that were selected, right? That would be bad. We didn't want to force people to visit pages of people they would be uncomfortable looking at their posts. So we gave the opportunity to opt out of those certain people. And so for the Qualtrics sample, it was 4 close friends and 4 random friends, and then in MTurk we did 5 close friends and 5 random friends. And if they deselected everyone, then we kept popping up the friend selector until they had 5 random friends that they were comfortable answering questions about. So, before they visited these friends' Facebook timelines, we asked about things like their participants' own Facebook activity. We asked them to enter in some information about what they remembered about how active their friends had been on Facebook. We asked them about the relationship closeness, and we used the inclusion of the other in the self scale, which is a scale that people commonly use to measure the closeness of a relationship, the strength of a tie, basically. How close do you feel, and then select the circle that best represents your relationship, basically. We asked them about how frequently they communicated with each friend in other communication media. Then we asked them, before they visited the friends' timelines, whether they feel like the newsfeed always shows them every post that their friends create, because we wanted to kind of gauge their opinion about that. And then we asked them why they think so. Then we directed them and we provided links so they could easily access their friends' timelines. They visited the timeline of all of the friends, the close friends and the random friends, in random order. And we asked them to basically scroll back about a week in the friends' timeline, so to pay attention to the dates of the posts that they were seeing and scroll back about a week. So we didn't want them to basically be sort of lost in their friends' timelines forever. So then after they visited, we asked them questions about whether or not they noticed a post in their friend's timeline that they didn't remember seeing in their newsfeed. So this would be an example of a missed post. And then, if they had missed a post, we asked them to say how surprised they were about this. On MTurk, which is a survey that we did second, we also asked them why they thought they missed the post, as sort of a closed-ended question. And then at the very end of the survey, right before the demographics, we asked them specifically if they feel like Facebook uses algorithms in their newsfeed to choose what stories to show. So, in April of 2014, were users aware of the newsfeed algorithm? Well, kind of. So, Qualtrics users less so. They were less tech-savvy than the MTurk users. Most of the MTurk users were aware of the algorithm. Qualtrics users, I would say most of them had kind of an idea. Some of them definitely, some of them, well, yeah, maybe. Not too many people said, no, there's no algorithm. But even if users aren't sure that there's an algorithm, we still thought that they might be able to form beliefs and expectations about what they were going to see in their newsfeed based on their interactions with it. And so we analyzed the responses to this open-ended. So there was a closed-ended question and an open-ended question. We asked, do you feel like your newsfeed always shows you every post created by your friends? And then we asked them to explain why they answered that way. And this response had a minimum length requirement. So we found out that on Qualtrics, we didn't have the minimum length requirement, and when we asked this question, we got a lot of really bad answers, like, I don't know, or blank, or just really poor data quality. So when we did it a second time with the Mechanical Turk sample, we actually required, they couldn't move on in the survey until they'd edited 150 characters. And he said it was about the length of a tweet, 3 sentences. It's amazing. I mean, just that little change in the method, we got some really good responses from the Mechanical Turk workers about that. So I definitely recommend this. It also served sort of a second purpose, which was, it's really easy to identify cheaters who are trying to fill your survey out more than once by basically comparing and looking for identical answers. So I've started using this technique in other surveys, just including a question where they have to write something that's about the length of a tweet, so I can identify the cheaters a little bit easier. You can only identify it in sort of post-processing, but yeah. Okay, so what do we find? Oh, the median response length was about 50 words, so people really did actually, the length, it worked. All right. So, people form intuitive causal explanatory theories that help them interact with the world and accomplish their goals. This is just something that we do all the time. Their beliefs are generated out of their experiences, and they help them interact with the world and accomplish their goals. They know what to expect in situations. And so, when I analyzed these responses, I conducted iterative inductive coding to identify basically their intuitive theories about how the newsfeed works. And I focused on beliefs about who or what is in control of which posts appear, and then also the evidence they provided to support their beliefs. So for example, Okay, so this part of this response, this respondent said, I usually see posts by the same people every day. This leads me to believe that it might prioritize posts by closer friends. And the it in this response refers to the newsfeed, or at least that's what I assume, because I used the words newsfeed in the question, and so there were a lot of pronouns like that in the responses. But this is basically a statement of what this participant thinks is going on. And then for the evidence, this person says, for example, with over 200 friends, I can't remember the last time I saw news updates from more than half of them. So this is the evidence the person provided to support their claim about what the newsfeed is doing, basically. And so what we did was we coded the responses this way, and then we drew connections basically across the control and evidence themes based on overlap within the responses, effectively. So, and we ended up identifying 6 intuitive theories or patterns of causal beliefs, and I'm going to talk about a few of them now. All right. So first of all, only 8% said yes. They think that they see everything that their friends post. 18% said maybe, and 73% of people said no, they don't see everything that their friends post. But they had a lot of different reasons for saying so, and some of them didn't have anything to do with the newsfeed algorithm. So for example, some people said that they'd never had any experience that led them to believe that they weren't seeing everything. Whereas other people said that there were just so many posts, of course they couldn't possibly be seeing everything. So this is sort of an information overload kind of argument that has nothing to do with the algorithm. Other people mentioned that the way they use Facebook's mechanisms means that they're definitely not seeing everything. So you can, for example, and it's still there, it's just sort of buried in the interface, select most recent or top stories. And people who were aware that they were using top stories and not most recent felt like, well, yeah, they were seeing some posts, but not other posts, because if they switch it to the other one, then they see things that they weren't seeing before. And then there were other people who basically acknowledged that, well, when someone else creates a post, they might not give me permission to see it. So other people's privacy settings may be affecting whether or not I can see a post. But what I want to focus on in a little bit more detail is basically the causal beliefs that had to do with the system making decisions on the user's behalf. So the user's noticing a pattern of symptoms that triggered them to sort of be aware of the algorithm. So one thing we found was that users notice missed posts when somebody that's on their friends list basically says something to them about a post and they don't ever remember seeing it. So this particular person says, sometimes when I see a friend in real life, they will ask if I saw something that they posted, and at least half the time I haven't even seen it. If I go directly to their profile, then I'm able to read it. But so often things don't appear in my newsfeed, which I find annoying. So many people express frustration about missed posts. But it's really hard to say from a quote like this whether the posts were missed because of the algorithm, or because the person just didn't remember seeing it, or maybe the person just didn't visit Facebook at the right time to be able to see the post. Sometimes people felt like they hadn't seen a post from somebody lately, so they decided to actually go find out what that person had been up to on their own. So this person says, sometimes I feel like I haven't heard anything about a friend for a while. I wonder if maybe they've quit Facebook, or maybe even unfriended me. Then I go to their profile and look, and they've been posting stuff the whole time. So that means that my newsfeed just hasn't been showing me what they posted. So this is interesting because this is evidence of that idea that people have kind of a background awareness of who they should be encountering on Facebook and who they don't encounter regularly. And that this sometimes prompts them, this awareness prompts them to follow up with somebody they haven't heard from in a while. If they investigate and find out that they've actually been missing posts, then this leads them to believe it must be the result of the system's behavior. So some of the respondents actually talked about times that they felt like the posts that they were seeing in their newsfeed were different than what they felt like they should be seeing. So some users felt like they saw patterns in whose posts ended up in their feeds, and these patterns just weren't making sense to them. So here's an example. No, the timeline bounces up things from the past back to the top. Things that may have been more recently posted get pushed down. If they get pushed down far enough, I might not scroll down far enough to see the friend's post. So this person seems to be observing a situation where things are just not appearing the way that they want to see them. So this leads them, a lot of respondents' answers had statements in them about the newsfeed being out of order, or wanting to see posts in linear order or real order. And they talked about, they used like metaphors like bumping things to the top or bouncing them or pushing things down. So this seems to indicate that there is an expectation of the right or the proper order for posts to appear in. Respondents also had expectations about how quickly the content in their newsfeed should turn over or refresh. So seeing the same posts over and over again meant that there were probably new posts that were out there somewhere in the system that they just weren't being shown. So this particular person says, I know it doesn't show me every post. It changes simply by refreshing the page to older posts that I've already seen, which is something people are not very happy with when that happens. Also, people noticed when they felt like they were seeing posts only from some of their friends and not other ones. So this participant said, many people I'm friends with do not show up in my newsfeed, even though I know that they post to Facebook. I generally only see posts from the same group of people, even though I have quite a few friends. So this seems to be interpreted as evidence that there are additional posts from other people that just aren't being shown, because they're convinced that those people are posting. Some users actually started to speculate that the patterns they were experiencing weren't happening by accident. There was actually intentionality behind them. And so they started wondering and speculating in their answers about some mechanism, what that mechanism might be like that was prioritizing posts for display. So these respondents usually contained a reference to either Facebook or, in 42 cases, an algorithm. So they actually use the word algorithm, making inferences about their preferences. So this person says, I generally feel like Facebook shows me the posts that it thinks I'd be most interested in. I feel like if I want to see all of them, I have to do so manually. So this person felt like Facebook was guessing about what they wanted to see and were interested in, and was displaying the posts that were relevant. And that meant that if there were posts Facebook didn't think was relevant, then they had to actually make some extra effort to go find them. Other people noticed that they were aware, or they became aware that the system knows the people they interact with most often on Facebook. And so the posts it shows them are then based on their past interactions with that particular person. So this person says, I know that it shows me the most commented on posts. It also shows the friends' pages that I visit the most. So if you start liking more posts, then it may show more posts that I want to see. So this person is actually suggesting a strategy, sort of an intervention for trying to train the system to show them the kinds of things that they want to see. And then finally, some respondents actually were aware of the popularity bias that I mentioned earlier. So the feeling that the posts that made it to the top of the feed were the ones that other people had paid more attention to. So this person says, what likely happens is that a popular person gets many views to their page, so people like a post. This post then gets put in the newsfeed for more people to like. Posts that have no likes don't always make it to the feed. So what we have here are examples of the kinds of signals that our respondents noticed that basically kind of clued them in to the fact that there might be a pattern to what they were seeing in their news feeds. So they mentioned missed posts that were either mentioned by a friend or that they discovered on their own. They saw posts that were out of order, a turnover rate that didn't seem quite right. And then other users were making active guesses about the mechanism behind this. So relevant posts based on my past behavior, only seeing posts that other people have liked. And so we took this to mean that users are actually learning from interacting with the algorithm, and that they're reverse engineering, effectively, aspects of it based on their repeated experiences with it over time. And we think that the feedback loop plays a pretty big role in the fact that they're able to do this. So, how do users react then to experiencing a missed post? Are there any patterns in their perceptions of the missed posts and their expectations for which posts that they should see? And this is actually really important to focus on if you think about it, because a lot of people use Facebook for relationship maintenance. It's actually a very common thing that people say when they talk about what they get out of using Facebook. There have been a couple of studies. In particular, what I'm thinking about is a study done by Burke and Kraut using actual Facebook data. And then Keith Hampton, when he was here visiting last semester, also talked about a study that he'd done that demonstrated that use of Facebook actually does strengthen people's relationships. So the Facebook study combined log data, where they actually were able to measure interactions between people, and then kind of a longitudinal situation where they had people report their closeness with different individuals over time. And they found that the Facebook newsfeed was instrumental in basically in improving the closeness of people's relationships. And it was actually viewing and interacting with posts that was doing it. So missed posts actually can have the potential to affect someone's real life closeness and real life relationships, because it's a missed opportunity to interact with that person. So, remember back to that big long slide where I talked about what we asked them in the survey. One of the questions that we asked them after they visited their friend's newsfeed was, when you were scrolling through your friend's timeline, did you notice posts that he or she created that you don't remember seeing in your newsfeed? And so, I'm not sure if you can read that, but these are two, they're basically frequency histograms. One of them is from Qualtrics and one of them is from Enter. And so the y-axis is the count of participants, and the x-axis is how many friends on whose timelines did they miss a post. So basically what this says is, for the Qualtrics sample, 120 participants noticed a missed post on one friend's timeline. And for the Enter one, 68 people noticed a missed post on 3 friends' timelines. So that's how you read that graph. So everybody, almost everybody, noticed missed posts. But, very few people noticed missed posts on everyone's timeline, or at least reported missed posts. And then after, if they had noticed a missed post, we asked them basically to talk about whether they were surprised by that. So I did 2 regression analyses with different DVs. It was the same regression in both cases, just a different dependent variable. One of them it was a logistic regression for the likelihood of noticing a missed post, and the other one had surprise as a continuous dependent variable. So surprise was measured on a Likert scale. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the results here. So this is the first regression for whether or not they noticed a missed post. And the most important predictors in this regression in terms of both effect size and statistical significance were how recently the friend was active on Facebook. So if they hadn't been active on Facebook in the last week, then they didn't notice a missed post because there were no posts to miss. And then how well the participant remembered their friend's activity. So if you remember, before they visited their friend's timeline, I asked them basically to report how long ago do you think this person created a post. And then when they visited the timeline, I asked them to put in how long ago the friend had actually created a post. So I could use those 2 responses to basically create a measure of accuracy of people's memories. And so the accuracy of their memory was important for whether or not they remembered noticing a missed post. But we had thought that closeness was going to be important, that people would be basically more likely to notice missed posts on the timelines of closer friends. And that wasn't the case at all. The coefficient for closeness is really, really small, and it's not statistically significant. So closeness really had no effect on whether or not somebody noticed a missed post, even after controlling for these memory effects and how active the friend was. So what this bar chart shows is predicted probabilities that I generated from the model. There were a bunch of control variables. I didn't spend much time on the regression, but those were all either held at their mean or their median. So basically, what I wanted to notice from this graph is that the bars are basically the same length. So that means that closeness didn't really have an effect on the likelihood of missing a post. But if the friend had noticed, or if the friend had posted in the last week, that was an important effect. That's all on this slide. So basically, to sum up, being closer to somebody does not make it more likely that you're going to miss a post. So if they noticed a missed post, we asked how surprised they were that they didn't see a post in a particular friend's feed. And we asked about surprise because we feel that it signals an expectation on the user's part that has not been met or that has been violated. So surprise happens when you experience something that runs counter to the way you think things are going to happen. And it's actually a really important aspect of learning from a situation. So if something is surprising to you, then it serves as a signal that you should pay attention and maybe update your beliefs or your mental model about what's going on. And we expected that it would be more surprising for people to find a missed post on a close friend's timeline than on a distant acquaintance's timeline. And that's actually what we found. So this is the same table as before, only I've hidden the notice missed columns, and now you can see the surprise columns over here. So if you notice, closeness is positive and statistically significant. So, and it wasn't in the other model. It wasn't statistically significant. It was very, very small. So participants were more surprised about missed posts from close friends than they were from distant friends. And then another aspect that was really important in this regression was the visibility of the friend. So we included a question in the survey that basically asked, we wanted to get kind of an indication. You know how sometimes you have somebody who's like a really prolific poster on Facebook? They're always, my cousin is like this, she's constantly on Facebook. And so we wanted to get an indication to be able to basically control for whether or not these people were like that in other people's feeds. So we asked them, would you say this person's in the top 5 people that you see in your newsfeed all the time, or something similar to that? And that turned out to be pretty important. So if the friend was a particularly visible one in their newsfeeds, then people were even more surprised when they missed a post from those people. So basically, being closer to somebody doesn't mean you're more likely to miss a post from them, but it does mean you'd be more surprised if that happens. So, we really wondered why this is. The results made us wonder about why people were surprised, and if surprise had any relationship with their beliefs about the algorithm. So we thought that maybe the correlation with closeness might go away if we were able to control for some of these sort of causal beliefs or explanatory theories. Or, you know, if people were attributing the fact that they missed posts to their own behavior, maybe that would negate some of the correlation with closeness. And this has important implications for transparency. So there's a lot of conversation right now about algorithms and automation in systems and how much users should be made aware of what the algorithms are doing. And if it turns out that these causal beliefs are really important for surprise and really important for whether people notice missed posts, that might give us a kind of indication about the kinds of information we need to provide to users in an interface to help them learn more about what the algorithm is doing. So, take a look at the water here. So remember I told you about on the Qualtrics survey how we had an open-ended question and the data quality wasn't very good. Well, it turns out we used the responses that actually were good to come up with a set of closed-ended items that we then used in the MTurk survey. So we asked people in the Qualtrics survey to talk about why they thought they had missed posts. And then we used their answers to come up with this set of items. So some of them are related to the user's own behavior. So I don't spend a lot of time going through my newsfeed, and I don't scroll down to see other posts in my newsfeed, and I don't always read every post. So those are people attributing their missing posts to their own behavior. And then there were some sort of what we call filter-related beliefs. So I don't interact with my friend very often on Facebook, or Facebook must think I don't want to see this friend's posts, or Facebook thinks my friend and I are not good friends. Those are things that attribute the agency to the algorithm, not to the user. And so we made basically 2 composite variables out of these items. One that was the user-related beliefs, and one that was the filter-related beliefs, and we incorporated that into one of our regressions with surprise as the dependent variable. So we were basically throwing these variables in there about people's causal beliefs and seeing how if it had a relationship with how surprised they were. And it turns out that it did. But the first thing I want you to notice is that this regression is from the mechanical Turk sample and not from the Qualtrics sample. The other ones were from the Qualtrics sample. And it turns out that closeness is positive and statistically significant and fairly large in this regression as well. So we saw the same pattern of correlation between closeness and surprise in the MTurk sample as we saw in the Qualtrics sample. So that was pretty cool because there's some differences in the composition of the samples that made me think that maybe that would be the case. And then we have these interactions down here between closeness and the beliefs. And it's a lot easier to understand what those interactions look like if you graph the predicted values. So that's what this shows. And so these are 2 different graphs of 2 different sets of predicted values. So this one we generated holding the user beliefs at their mean for the different levels of filter beliefs. And then the opposite for this one. So the filter beliefs were held at their mean, and we varied the user beliefs when we generated the predicted values. And it turns out that when people had weak filter beliefs, The predicted levels of surprise are neutral at the center of the scale, or maybe even a little bit lower. So when filter beliefs are strong, surprise is high for the close friends, the red line, for the high closeness. And then for the low closeness friends, you can see there's sort of a decreasing trend as filter beliefs get stronger. So this basically means that when participants did not assign responsibility for the missed posts to the algorithm, they were not surprised to notice a missed post. But then the stronger their beliefs were, the stronger their blame was, effectively, for the algorithm, the more they believed the algorithm was at work in their newsfeed, the more they expected to see posts from their close friends, basically. But not necessarily the posts from people they didn't feel close to. Then, with the user beliefs, so when user behavior beliefs are strong, people were not surprised about missed posts. That makes sense, right? If I think I'm not seeing posts because I don't go to Facebook very often, then I'm not going to be surprised that I missed them. When the user behavior beliefs are weak, we kind of see a similar pattern to the filter beliefs, right? So people were more surprised to miss posts from close friends than from distant friends. So, what are users really learning from the algorithm? And any algorithm is optimized for behavior under a certain set of conditions. So you wouldn't expect an algorithm that was optimized to do one thing to perform the same way in a system that had a completely different set of underlying data. So as the users are interacting with the algorithm, let's assume that they're forming kind of an operational definition of what it's doing. And here's an actual example from something one of our subjects said. But over the years, it seems like I see their posts less often. It's very annoying, actually. And lately, I've been considering quitting Facebook. Only about 50% of my newsfeed is posts from friends. It seems like unless you actually communicate with them often, you hardly, if ever, see their posts. So this person's actually noticed if she doesn't interact with people regularly, then she doesn't see posts from them. I don't know if that's something you've experienced as well. I definitely feel like that sometimes happens. So this person kind of is describing a self-perpetuating cycle. I don't interact with them, I don't see their posts, I don't get opportunities to interact with them, they go away, I hate Facebook, basically. So missed posts seem like a symptom that can kick off this whole cycle, that can be unpleasant enough for users, that they basically are motivated to try to figure out what's going on. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if, because some of the charts, maybe I'm not reading them right, but it could be personality that you're getting more than anything to do with algorithms.
In what way?
People are more control-oriented, both think that there's an algorithm controlling things and are bloody surprised when something doesn't happen the way they think it should.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, so we had people answer questions about a set of friends, and then we used a multi-level model, so we had a random effect control for participants. So ideally in the model, that variance would sort of be captured by the random effect and controlled away. So these effects would still be present.
But it would be reflected in their response to both variables, I would think. If they're
possible, yeah.
More,
yeah, definitely in the
controlled.
in the open-ended responses, we could be seeing some of that sort of thing. Sure.
anyway, hypothesis.
Yeah, and we didn't include any personality variables in the regression at all. The survey was already pretty long. All right. So let's see. Where was I? Oh, right. So the results from the follow-up survey basically showed that participants' causal beliefs were important in the experience of surprise. So surprise was high for close friends when filter beliefs were strong, etc. So I wanted to highlight this person's quote because it actually represents an instance where someone not only speculated about a strategy that might work, but then actually talked about implementing the strategy, and it seems like a lot of work to me. So this person says that they're making a point to visit certain people's timelines that they want to make sure are showing up in their newsfeed. We even had one participant who I'm sure is a total outlier who said that they created, you know, you can create friend lists in Facebook. They created a list of friends that was everyone in their actual friend list, because that was the only way they felt like they could figure out to see the things that everyone was posting. So, you know, people were trying to design these interventions on their own. The one thing that I wanted to bring up that happened after we conducted this research was that, has anybody seen this screen before? This is a new setting. Well, you've seen it because I've shown it to you. So you can actually, in your newsfeed preferences, go in and choose certain people that you want to be prioritized higher in your newsfeed. This was released last July, in July of 2015. And so you can basically pick the people that you want to see most often. This is a new intervention that Facebook came up with. So if we assume that people are basically spending as much time as they want to on Facebook, then using this is going to change the composition of their news feeds. And so it's going to shift the constraints that are imposed by the algorithm. But it's not entirely clear how that's going to affect their news feed or the system as a whole. So, for example, it's plausible that I select my friend Susie. This is Susie. She's my friend from high school. She posts about her kids and her dog, and if I select her as one of my Facebook friends, I'm going to see more of her posts. And I'll probably like them because her kids are cute and her dog is cute. But my liking her posts, if I'm seeing more of them, might also have side effects for other people who are friends with Susie. So my interactions with her posts might make her posts more visible to other people. So it could actually end up system-wide spreading user attention out across more posts, which basically makes for more diversity for the whole system. So that could be a good thing. But it could also end up creating basically an echo chamber in my own newsfeed. So maybe it'll end up only showing me the posts of the people that I select. So I'd have like the high school friend, cousin newsfeed, for example, and just sort of reinforcing and showing me the same things over and over again. And the point is that because of this interdependence, it's really hard to predict beforehand what's going to happen with an intervention like this. So the interdependence between the user and the algorithm creates what I like to call socio-technical bugs, because they're not just the technology, and they're not just the user. They're a product of the interaction between them that produces this potentially unexpected system behavior. And so there's a lot of discussion right now, like I mentioned before, about what transparency for algorithms should look like. And I guess I'm arguing from this study on Facebook, we actually have kind of an accidental transparency, that people are designing their own sort of interventions by themselves. So on Facebook, they already know. They've already kind of figured out that something is going on. And this accidental transparency that's a result of the feedback loop can be part of what's producing these unexpected behaviors. And this is a really big challenge for the design of socio-technical systems, and really any system that involves automation and user behavior that has this high level of interdependence with it. So, thank you. Josh?
One thing that has been like nagging at my head from like early on, and maybe this is probably something you're going to be looking at, is the causality of learning.
Mm-hmm.
So you sort of said that surprise might be something that kicks off learning,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, I have a cluster of questions, so I'll try to articulate all of them. One is.
We don't have causal results, so that's one of your questions.
Well,
yeah, it's all correlation.
One is, did you look at all about at the relationship between time on site and experience with the site, and whether or not someone was more or less likely to infer an algorithm? That's question one.
Mm-hmm.
And then.
Can I answer that question before
Sure.
I forget it?
Sure.
So we did use those as controls in the model. They were all self-report, so we did not have access to any of that information via the API. And I don't remember off the top of my head if those variables were important or not.
Okay. So, because it seems to me maybe you can't actually get learning over time with an individual, but maybe if you study the population, you'll be able to see. Because I'm interested in how this changes over time, as are you.
So I did have an internet literacy measure that I based off of one that Esther Hargitay has used, and it's basically a list of internet-related terms, and you ask people to self-report how familiar they are with them. And I do remember that was important for the M-Turk regression. I don't think it was important for the Qualtrics regression, but I do think that because there was more variation in familiarity with technology in the M-Turk sample than in the Qualtrics sample. And everybody uses Facebook so much that everyone's a Facebook expert,
Sure.
basically.
Sure. And then a following question. It seems if you were surprised, you would be surprised once, and then you would become less surprised over time. So maybe not, but I find it odd that your belief, the strength of your belief in a filter means you are more surprised. Because I would think, if I'm pretty sure there's a filter, like, well, okay.
So
Facebook
my
does this.
interpretation of that is people are putting faith in the technology
Yeah.
and believing that it should be doing the right thing, and because that's what they say it's for, right? That it's supposed to show me, it's supposed to help me. So I think that they're more surprised because it's not doing what they think it should be doing. Eduardo, you've been going like this.
No.
Okay.
Well, okay. I'll follow up one last time. It's just, so your prediction over time. So I guess maybe one reason for surprise might be that people just simply never thought to check that they were seeing things and they had this filter. So maybe multiple presentations over time would reduce the level of surprise and they would become accustomed to that.
It's possible. It's definitely possible.
Okay.
The sample still showed a decent amount of surprise, though, right? I mean, there was the reaction. It seemed like there was like everyone wasn't saying I'm not surprised. It's all I've seen it all before. People
Right.
actually
Yeah. I mean, there was
expressing
variation in surprise. I feel like if you have a relationship with somebody and you're making effort to maintain that relationship, then I still think that for individual people and individual relationships, there would still be surprise if you missed something, especially if you felt like you knew what was going on with that person. So it's not just a function of the algorithm. Obviously, I have no data on whether the algorithm was hiding things or not because I don't have access to that. I do think that there's an important sort of relational maintenance component to this.
So, to an extent, I feel like there is a disconnect between, first showing people that the closeness to their friends doesn't have, an impact on whether the post is showing up or not.
Mm-hmm.
But then people do think that it should matter because they're more surprised.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. I mean, I'm more convinced on the part that you're saying a bit more surprised and, based on their closeness.
Right.
But I don't know about the first part because, there is a salience issue. Like if a friend of mine is closer, I will pay closer attention to what's going on on my newsfeed regarding that person, and then that might make me respond that I am not.
Yes.
I haven't seen that post. So, and then there's not much you can do about it.
We tried to construct a couple of measures from self-report data that allowed us to control for some of that variance, right? So we asked them before they visited what they remembered. We asked them to write down what was there so we could get an indication of how accurate their memory was. We asked them to report how often they see things from that person. So we did the best we could, basically, with self-report data.
Do you control for that data?
Yeah. Those were controls in the models.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the second part is related to Bill's question about personality traits. And you said you're using a random effects model that should be taking that up. But I was wondering, why don't you use a fixed effects model if what if you care about is the bias introduced by personality traits? I mean, you're using
I could
loading
do
model
that
there,
if that
but
were,
you can use a linear
that were my
probability
research
regression
question.
with fixed effects.
Yeah.
So you are in effect exploiting the variation within each subject.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I just didn't do that. I mean, there's an interesting sort of religious battle about whether you should use fixed effects or random effects to represent people. Sorry?
I'm a fixed effects fan.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Yeah. So, we can talk about that offline.
It would also explain why you don't learn, because you're psychologically bothered by surprises.
Psychologically bothered. Other questions? Yeah,
you mentioned that sort of part of the implication of your research could be to sort of come up with suggestions how to design socio-technical systems differently. I was wondering whether you could elaborate this a little bit more.
Yeah, actually. Let's see. I have some. Let me find them. Oh, you can't see that. That's my dog. That's what I'm looking at. Give me 2 seconds here. So I've been speculating about this for a while because a lot of people talk about transparency if it's a thing that you can turn on and off, right? And so I had that little diagram that I put together of the feedback loop, and then I went through and I brainstormed for each one of these things, like what information, if we were going to be transparent, right, what information will we give people? So a common intervention that people suggest is, well, why don't we just show them the unpersonalized version, right? And so that would be transparent in a way, because you would say this is the unpersonalized version, but then it would sort of push onto the user figuring out what the differences were between them. You could give them a description of what the bias looks like, right? So you could say, this is bias towards popularity. But then that leaves the person, again, they have to figure out, well, what does that mean in my own feed? You could tell them the consequences of their actions. So the people who are like, if I visit these 5 friends' timelines, then I'll see their posts more. You could give them kind of an indication of what cause and effect really looks like in the system. You could tell them what their actual audience is, so they have some idea who's out there actually interacting with their posts. You could give them characteristics, summary statistics about what the corpus looks like. So is everybody posting cat videos, and that's why I'm seeing more cat videos, for example. You could tell them actually what the selection and ranking rules look like. You could tell them about what's being prioritized and what isn't. So there's lots of different things that you could do. And so one of the next stages of this work that I want to actually kind of figure out how to do, it's really hard, right? Because you have to have repeated interactions over time, and if it's content that people don't care about, they're not going to behave the same way as they would in the real world. But I'd like to try out some of these strategies in kind of an experimental setting and figure out what kinds of things people are taking away if we give them different kinds of transparency information.
Surprised that Facebook doesn't do it, because I mean,
they probably are.
there's a, well, but not for the user, right? I mean, it's not, there's a lot of systems that you can act with as different types of users. So for example, you can, our own learning software, for example. I mean, I'm not sure whether students can interact in roles other than students, but I can interact as an instructor, as a student, right? And so one could actually give people options along those lines.
Well,
Maybe even charge.
I kind of think that's what they're trying to do, is provide
Yeah.
a little bit of transparency and control with that friend selector thing. The interesting thing is actually Jacob Solomon's dissertation. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his work. He was a student here, he recently graduated. In his dissertation, he found that basically just giving people control, the semblance of control, makes them happier with the system, whether or not the control actually has any effect, right? That was his dissertation. So maybe, I know, totally rampantly speculating here, but maybe people are actually just, because they have that screen, happier with their newsfeed when it's not actually doing anything at all. And how would they even know? There's no way for them to know.
Or maybe it could be causing them to like second guess, and so your accidental transparency. If I feel like I've customized it, maybe I feel like I've done my job, and so I'm not going to be speculating and guessing about what's going on in the news feed after that. So it might actually reduce the accidental transparency.
Stop the guessing. Interesting. Yeah, Josh.
Yeah, this is a really abstract question.
Great, I love those.
Well, we might. So, you know, so the question is, what is optimal design?
Whoa.
And right, so
I think we need
so
beer for an answer to that
what are we
question.
trying to design anyway? It's one thing when you have value sensitive design. Great, we're preserving the autonomy of the individual, trying not to marginalize anyone. But what is optimal design of Facebook here? And so there is an evolutionary process by which we get to some better design, even if it's not better.
Well,
it's
better for
changing.
whom, right? I mean,
Right.
the user and Facebook may not be after the same thing.
So, right, so the point though is that, and this gets back to the learning question. So, Facebook has been around for so many years, and more people are gonna learn more and more about the algorithm, and engage in different strategies. It's going to change things, it's gonna change Facebook's market, Facebook is gonna detect this, they're gonna change their software in response. So there's great socio-technical evolution, we're just looking at a little tiny piece of it right now. And I guess a question, so we can't know what we're designing for optimally, but maybe we can design something that adapts quickly. And so maybe what we want to do is prioritize the adaptability of a software platform to meet the needs of its population. So the question to ask here is whether or not the system as it is designed currently, with its current levels of transparency, is good in this evolutionary sense, or is there a way to use sort of the research you're doing to recommend a socio-technical system that is evolutionarily more adaptive, or better changing. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. And I mean, I think that before we can get there, we need to come up with a way to actually measure the effect of algorithms in the system, right? We don't even have a good way to do that. And so one of the things that CK and I are working on, Facebook published a paper in Science last year and released a data set. And so we are kind of reanalyzing their data set, trying to use different assumptions about what an algorithm effect looks like, and trying to see if we can basically come up with a set of recommendations for the kinds of things that you might want to look for, even to detect that something is going on. We don't even have those metrics yet, right? So we can't talk about sort of optimal design over time until we can somehow measure the phenomenon that we're interested in. It's really hard. Yeah.
Can I just have two more questions? I mean, one is, I came a little late, so you may have addressed this at the beginning. But so how much do you or do we know about the algorithm, right? I mean, I know very little about Facebook, but I had long discussions with folks who do, let's say, our student analytics, for example, and there is not just an algorithm. The algorithm morphs continuously, more or less, and the little they were willing to share. I mean, it's.
This is what we know.
Yeah.
They have a blog. They post stuff on their blog.
Yeah.
Transparency actually is a problem for companies, right? Because they don't want to give out too much information, because then people can reverse engineer what they're doing, and it's a trade secret.
So then my follow-up question is this: typically, you would expect that there's quite a heterogeneous user population, right? And
yeah, actually, that's what. Where is it? I can't find it. There's one about hiding.
So one algorithm probably doesn't serve everybody equally well. So I'm wondering whether there's multiple algorithms running.
So they discovered through did you see this? They discovered through soliciting user feedback that some people were using their newsfeed as if it were like an inbox, and they were hiding every post that they read, like hiding. And Facebook normally interprets that signal as, I really don't want to see this, not, oh, I'm just done with it. And so they had to adapt their algorithm to sort of account, because these signals, the strength of the hide is not the same thing for everyone.
But do we know whether there's multiple algorithms operating for different users?
Of course. And this is one of those, this is sort of like, SIGGRAPH in the 80s, right? Like the real innovation in terms of machine learning and things like this is moving to industry, not necessarily. At least in these kind of applications, because they have the data. There's absolutely a whole set of algorithms that's going on, for sure.
So there's an interesting sort of economic issue involved here, because I mean, I always thought that models like Facebook and Google and so forth, right, they're sort of based essentially on the fact that we didn't really have clear property rights for personal information. Right? If that had been like a sort of a rock solid concept in law, for example, then they probably would have to figure out some ways to compensate people for it explicitly, right? And if that were the case, I bet that there would be way more differentiated business models for offering information, right? So what we see in commercial markets where those rights exist, we see versioning up and down the yin-yang, right? And to tap into different user expectations and willingness to pay and so forth, right? It's kind of interesting that this is happening, but it's sort of really sort of beyond what we really see, what we know, we can guess it, right? We think it's happening, but it's invisible. So,
and in the US especially, privacy has been something that industry organizations have, every time it comes up as a thing that we might want to regulate this, industry's like, oh, no, don't worry, we'll do it ourselves, because they don't want to have legislation basically controlling what they can and can't do with data.
And you're seeing some of that versioning right now, because if you go at exactly the same time and look at Facebook on your computer, on your tablet, and on your phone, you get different things.
No, sure.
They actually use different algorithms for the device you're connected to.
Yeah, for sure.
Methodological quibble.
Yeah, of course.
I think none of us like missing data, and we always, and now on online surveys, I know there's a real trend towards forcing you to choose an option, and now you're forcing them to do an open-ended questionnaire. I'd be so worried about non-opinions, where you're creating data where they really don't have an opinion, or they don't really have a thought because they have to get on with the questionnaire.
Yeah, I mean, we did make a pass through the responses when we were doing the qualitative coding, when I was doing the qualitative coding, and basically Mark just totally kind of really unbelievable responses. Like, I don't care, and like, 100 spaces or something like that. So I did weed those things out. There were people who did try to cheat. Building in other data quality signals, right? So attention check questions, that internet literacy scale that I mentioned that has the words and rating of familiarity. I always throw in a fake word that sounds plausible, and anybody says that they have full familiarity with the fake word, I throw out their data because they're just not paying enough attention. I use an edit distance metric, so looking at different sections of the survey, trying to identify people that just pick the same answer down the row. So I used other ways to try to throw out people that didn't seem like they were taking the survey seriously.
Were those correlated with bad answers in the qualitative?
I don't know, that's a good question. I didn't look at that.
If you could set it up so that if they have to go back and fill in the open-ended.
Yeah.
Maybe
So
that would
I
be a
always set
way
up
of
the
it.
survey so they can go back and forth. I never.
No, but if you could identify the people who didn't fill it out at first and
Oh,
then
and
have
then
to go back,
I have to go back.
maybe you could look at,
Interesting.
qualitatively look at those compared to the people
Yeah.
who originally filled it
Yeah,
out and see if
that's
you're
interesting.
a wacky response, sort of
Yeah.
non-opinion.
I did identify on MTurk that there was one person that tried to fill out the survey 6 times using different worker IDs.
Oh, that was
And
me. I hated
pasted
it.
in the same answer. So, that violates the MTurk terms of service. So people aren't supposed to do that. But I did catch a lot of cheaters that way.
So I don't know whether you announced, George, at the beginning that nobody can leave this room until at least one student asks a question.
Forgot to do that, yeah. That's totally right.
Please.
And everyone in my class, I can mark it,
I have a question. I have something that kept popping up in my head while you were talking about
Great.
it. So have you noticed that they've added a missed post kind of?
Oh, they haven't.
So there's
I
this new
haven't
thing
seen
on
that.
Facebook.
Maybe I don't have it yet.
So there's this new thing on Facebook where if you look at your friends, I don't know if you want to open up your profile, but yeah. If you look at your friends on the side, basically your public profile, if you look at it on the
Yeah.
side,
I don't
and you
have
have
that
your
on
friends
mine.
over there, you can see, you have all those little pictures of everyone, right? And right at the bottom, it'll say one missed post, or one new post, that's what it'll say.
Yeah.
Okay.
2 new
Okay,
posts,
okay.
5 new posts.
Yeah.
So depending on how long it's been since you've visited
Yeah.
their I'm not sure how that algorithm works. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
you've seen it in your news feed. Does it still classify the post as missed?
Yeah.
But I think that would kind of maybe change your findings of it
Mhm.
because it would
It-
eliminate
yes,
the
definitely.
surprise.
So we
probably.
did this study a couple years ago, and they've definitely been trying, innovating in this area since then. I have noticed, so I periodically get really pissed off at Facebook and stop visiting it for a while, and I'm in one of those phases right now. And but I had to log in to get screen captures for this presentation, right? And I noticed that the notifications I was getting were like, so-and-so posted recently, not the normal notifications, right? Like extra, like, please come look at this, kind of. So, yeah, more friend activity rather than like it's so-and-so's birthday or whatever. So, yeah.
But they also did the notifications, like you haven't interacted with so-and-so for a while, drop
Right.
them a line or something
Yeah.
like that.
We're
Yeah.
just trying to get you to use things other than just the algorithmic feed.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
trying to click
and
through to other
highlighting
places.
relationships, right? That's what that's
Yeah.
doing, is highlighting relationships. So clearly Facebook is aware of this stuff. So. Yeah, good question.
Josh's student.
Good move. Good move.
Really, we had that great discussion to set you up for Emilee's talk. You should have a thought or something. Extra points, really. Seriously.
Do I get extra points for that?
No.
You can have an extra cookie. This is one of those times where I start pulling sentences. Okay, I think we're done.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again.